is a suspicion that Brian Peck has done this to multiple child actors, because it says right here, detectives believe there may be additional victims who have not come forward. A photograph of Peck is available to the media by email through the LAPD Media Relations Office. Muchachos y muchachas, Brian Peck, a Hollywood kids film Nickelodeon producer, has been exposed by Drake Bell. Kind of. You see, Drake Bell recently made a very silent apparition on a trailer for a documentary called Quiet on Set. In this apparition, he simply just walks into the studio space and sits down on a director's chair and says absolutely nothing. But it was the loads that were preemptive and loaded the pathway for us to understand as the viewers what the heck was going on. And beforehand, we were being told about Brian Peck and him possibly abusing a child actor. Well, now we know that Brian Peck is one of the shadiest associates in Hollywood. And despite him being convicted and already charged with all these heinous crimes against at least one child, he was still made to work in Hollywood around children. There's a law that is in place to protect them, but why did nobody pay attention to it? Well, let's take a little bit of a deep dive on Brian Peck, who he is and what he did, and why this is so concerning, because even to this day, I have a concern that nothing has changed in Hollywood to protect children. With that being said, hold on to your butts, secure your wigs, stay right there. We're gonna go through it. Countless people are mistaking private browsing tabs as a way to stay anonymous online. Even with private browsing mode enabled, you can still be tracked by websites and internet service providers. That's why I've been using Virtual Shield VPN and absolutely love it. Thanks to Virtual Shield's help, I'm able to browse the internet anonymously, which protects myself, my data, my finances from cyber criminals, ISPs, rogue tech companies, or data mining giants. To start browsing the internet anonymously, use my link in the description below and you'll get a 67% off with a 60-day risk-free trial of Virtual Shield. That's virtualshield.com/NatalieDenise. Brian Peck was born July 29th, 1960. He was raised by a Jewish family and had a knack for all things Hollywood. He delved into his passion and eventually made himself a multidisciplinary within the world of Hollywood. In 1985, he achieved his initial breakthrough with the movie Return of the Living Dead, of which he was one of the only characters to return on all three movie series. And with time, Brian Peck had really diversified his portfolio within Hollywood, doing lots of things like filmmaking, producing, coaching, acting, and ultimately teaming up with one of the most powerful child networks in the world, Nickelodeon. Because of Brian Peck's role in Return of the Living Dead, he's actually a regular at horror conventions such as Monsterpalooza, and it really makes me think if anything's going to be the same for him from here forward on out. In 2004, Brian Peck was convicted for a lewd act against a child as well as oral copulation of a person under 16. Now, at the time, the child that made these allegations against Brian Peck was only known as John Doe. Now, John Doe didn't want to reveal his identity as a child, neither, I'm sure, as his parents didn't, because it would probably affect his career as a child actor. Later on, as we just recently learned with Drake Bell appearing on Quiet on Set, we're only making a very close connection that he is indeed that child that made the egregious allegations against Brian Peck at the time. According to court documents obtained by Daily Mail, Brian Peck had been coaching the young star in acting at his home when the offenses happened and was only arrested after the little John Doe budding actor's parents reported him to police. Now, I just want to take a little pause here and just talk to parents out there, regardless if you're a child actor's parent or if your child is in sports, whatever it is, okay? We do not live in a world where, that could happen more often than not, right? We live in a world where things like this will happen. Okay. You cannot trust your child at any stranger's house, whether they're a professional or not, leaving them alone to have them coached or taught lessons. Things like that really need to be monitored. I just want to take a little moment to do that because I'm about to read you the details of what Brian Peck was charged with, and let this be a warning to everybody that there are some really sick individuals out there. Okay, so it says the documents show Brian Peck was originally charged with 11 counts, including lewd act upon a child, sodomy of a person under 16, attempted sodomy of a person under 16, sexual penetration by foreign object, 4 counts of oral copulation of a person under 16, oral copulation by anesthesia or controlled substance, sending harmful matter, and using a minor for sex acts. Okay. Now, all of that it's just mind-blowing, and it's egregious that any adult would ever want to make offenses on a child like this, but the fact that I want to know how Brian Peck had anesthesia, right? Because it says specifically oral copulation by anesthesia or controlled substance. I don't know if this was some sort of, and I'm not a toxicologist. I'm not a substance specialist whatsoever. I'm not even a biologist. Okay. So I don't know how this can even be possible, but what type of substance would make a young kid immobile, right? And I think that is what this is insinuating, because anesthesia, I mean, if you're under anesthesia, you're not feeling anything, you are out. And so if you're under a controlled substance that is at least similar, if not the same as anesthesia and its effects, then he really, really drugged this kid up. Okay. Now, I actually want to go to the actual police report that was made by LAPD, and it reads, Hollywood acting and dialogue coach arrested for lewd acts with a child, Los Angeles, on August 19, 2003. Okay, so this was actually, this act was done a year before 2004, right? He was only convicted, Brian Peck was only convicted in 2004, but this shows to me that this was done 1 year prior. It says on August 19, 2003, at 9:30 a.m., detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department Sexually Exploited Child Unit Juvenile Division arrested 43-year-old Brian Richard Peck at his residence in Valley Glen. He was arrested for Penal Code Section 288C1, lewd acts with a child. The lewd acts with the minor occurred approximately 2 years ago. Okay, so it wasn't even 2003, it was 2001. At Peck's residence in the 1300 block of Delano Street, Valley Glen. At the time, Peck was coaching the victim. The investigation came into Peck began 2 weeks ago when the minor's family reported that Peck had molested the child over a 6-month period. So this didn't just happen in 2004. Like I said, he was just convicted. Okay. He was barely convicted, but the police report was reporting in 2003 that a year or two prior that Brian Peck was doing these things. Okay. And we're going to look at all of his credits, his movie credits, his show credits, because this is really going to paint a very dark picture for you guys, timeline wise, that this guy officially by police report was notated to have done this for at least 2 years back by 2003. The investigation, which included a search of Peck's residence, is ongoing. Peck remains in custody pending his arraignment on molestation charges. His bail was set at $500,000. The case will be represented by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for filing consideration. Detectives, get this part, okay? So it wasn't just Drake Bell, and I'm sure that, and we're gonna get into a little bit more, because Boy Meets World people are starting to make allegations, or they're making some sort of, contextual clues to us, the public. There is a suspicion that Brian Peck has done this to multiple child actors, because it says right here, detectives believe there may be additional victims who have not come forward. A photograph of Peck is available to the media by email through the LAPD Media Relations Office, and then it gives a number. Anyone having information regarding Brian Richard Peck or who believes that they are a victim is encouraged to contact the LAPD Sexually Exploited Child Unit Detective James Brown at that number on weekends and during off hours, and it gives all the hours. Okay, so this was published in 2003. This almost a decade ago. Listen. This is crazy, okay? Have you guys seen this? Just give me a comment in the comment section below. Have you guys ever seen the LAPD press room release of Brian Peck and it alluding that he actually could have done this to other child actors? I believe that he could have. We're actually, like I said, we're going to get into some side swipes that Boy Meets World actors are making on their podcast, but you know, there is some insinuation that he has done this multiple times. So in the end, Brian Peck actually pleaded no contest to the charges on 2 counts, lewd against a child and oral copulation, and the court found him guilty of both. Count 2 says that Brian Peck willfully, unlawfully, and lewdly commit a lewd and lascivious act upon and with the body of John Doe, who was 15 years old, with the intent of arousing, appealing to, and gratifying the lust, passions, and sexual desires of the defendant, who is at least 10 years older than John Doe. Count 6 says Brian Peck did unlawfully, being over the age of 21 years old, participate in an act of oral copulation with John Doe, a person under the age of 16 years. Brian Peck actually was featured in a very alternative documentary called An Open Secret, where they do delve into the dark aspects of Hollywood and where young boys, young men, teenagers do give their testimony on the dark exploitation going on in Hollywood, especially with young men. So Brian Peck was convicted in October of 2004. He was made to serve a sentence of 16 months in jail. But after he served 16 months in jail, he then returns back to Hollywood like nothing ever happened and continued to work with children. So what's actually really ironic is that Brian Peck worked with Bryan Singer, another Hollywood subject who has had these types of allegations made against him. He worked with Bryan Singer on X-Men 1 and X-Men 2.
Hi, my name is Bryan Singer, and I'm the director of X-Men.
I'm the other Brian Peck. I'm not the director of X-Men.
I've asked Brian if he would help me out here because I'm a little uncomfortable doing these things by myself.
Okay, so let's revisit what I mentioned before, the time frames, right? So according to the LAPD press release published in 2003, it mentioned that 2 years prior to that Brian Peck was alleged to have committed some pretty heinous acts. At least 6 months to that press release publishing, that the little John Doe that was not identified actually got abused over a 6-month period. Now, that would make it about 2001 at the very far of the time frame that we're mentioning here. So we're just going to take a look at the credits, the movie credits that Brian Peck actually has. And as you can see, it goes as early as 1988 on Growing Pains. As you guys may or may not know, Leonardo DiCaprio was actually a very young child actor. Well, he was a teenage boy working on sets of Growing Pains. Here is a bit of a clip from that behind the scenes of Growing Pains with him and Brian Peck interacting together.
I'll tell you that much, but you know, I had some teen following.
Who do I look like?
Little Ricky Schroeder, I think.
Oh, yeah, Ricky Schroeder.
Do this one. Then we can.
Young River Phoenix.
Show us a little drawing.
Oh, the
You
little
see,
drawings.
we draw drawings of each other. Brian is the famous artist, and we always make fun of each other and portray each other in silly, satirical ways.
Leo's job on this set, for some reason, is to make fun of me all day long.
Okay, so here we have.
Leo, as you know, is the latest, hottest, hunkiest teen idol there is.
Yeah, these muscles.
Look, speaking of hunky, huh?
Leo, what's it like to be a teen idol?
Ask Kirk Cameron. I don't. Well, I see my pictures there, and it's fun seeing those, and I haven't really got the full impact of it yet, so.
I don't know about that teen thing. I mean, I think it's good. I think it's good for publicity, but they don't, it's almost like they're not actors, you know what I mean? And it's like they portray them as like sort of a piece of meat. Like, you know, here's the new cute thing, take a look at him and go, ooh, ah. So I didn't dig that, no. I want to do characters.
Now, I am not a body language expert whatsoever, but it does make me uncomfortable knowing what Brian Peck had done and has been convicted to have done, and seeing him allow Leonardo DiCaprio to get so touchy with him. And it makes me wonder if someone like Leonardo DiCaprio, which by now is an A-lister, he's been in some of the most major productions, I wonder if he will ever come out to make allegations against Brian Peck. It would be really responsible, but also I am not in the place of a survivor or of somebody who suffered abuse. So the only thing that I will say is, despite any politics or differences that these actors may have appear to be on a side of, just give them grace. Give them grace, because we don't know what they've been through, right? But certainly this is concerning retrospectively looking back. And as you can see, he has worked on various kid productions, things like Tick, Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat, Kenan and Kel, Clueless, Guys Like Us, Boy Meets World. And speaking of Boy Meets World, Ryder Strong actually made some pretty interesting comments on a new podcast called Pod Meets World. So this podcast actually debuted just last month, and it's pretty interesting listening to it, given light of the things we're learning about Brian Peck, okay? It's almost as if all these things need to bubble up right now for us to know what's going on. So February 19th of this year, this podcast actually was published with Danielle Fishel, who played Topanga, Ryder Strong, and Will Friedle. And they were joined by a family therapist. Her name is Katie Morton, for an important discussion about Brian Peck. Brian Peck was a season 5 star on Boy Meets World, per the episode's official description. And the group talked about the difficult subjects of grooming, child sexual abuse, and their effects on victims. At the beginning of the episode, Danielle Fishel explains that since they all agreed to be open and honest, that even there might be some uncomfortable moments about their experience, the story of Brian Peck was one that they felt really necessary to share. And additionally, she noted that Friedle and Strong were actually recently contacted for a statement about Brian Peck. And while they didn't really explain why, it was likely because Brian Peck is part of that series on the documentary Quiet on Set. So instead of the Boy Meets World cast making one statement, they decided to tell their entire story in this podcast episode. I'm actually going to link it in the description below for you guys. Will Friedle said that he became close with Brian Peck right when he joined the show.
I never blame my mental illness for anything, and I'm not about to start now. My decisions are all my own. But because of the anxiety, it also keeps your world very small. So I was making sure I knew who was in my world. I didn't go to parties. I didn't really do that stuff. But I was working a lot after Boy Meets World. And this guy had so ingratiated himself into my life. I took him to 3 shows after Boy Meets World. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, this was the type of thing where the person he presented was this great, funny guy who was really good at his job. And you wanted to hang out with. Again, I didn't hang out with him a lot socially, but we were on 4 different shows together on sets all the time.
I did. I mean, we hung out all the time, yeah.
You hung out socially, right? Yeah, so that's the thing but that's because I just didn't have much of a social life because I was in my house. But I saw him every day, hung out with him every day.
Ryder Strong does recall that they hung out all the time, even despite of the fact that Brian Peck was like nearly 20 years older. Another detail that they recalled on the podcast was that despite them not remembering, the name of a stand-in, for instance, it was mostly because there were boundaries that separated the main actors with the stand-ins. But Brian Peck himself never had those boundaries set for him.
I think it's really important to talk about because I think it's important. Like, we had a lot of stand-ins leading up to season 5. And sometimes it just happened recently. We were like, hey, that guy who's in this episode is one of our stand-ins. And we couldn't remember his name. And that's not because we're terrible people. And it's not because we have awful memories. Sometimes it's just because even though we worked with those people every day, there were boundaries in place. That adult did have boundaries with us, didn't try to separate us from our friends or have lunch with us every day off stage. This particular person did. All the years of having stand-ins, no one ever, do I remember, regularly going to lunch with the cast members. But this person did. And part of that's because when they arrived on set, they were extremely charming. They were very personable. They had a lot of jokes. They also, because of their many years of experience working in the entertainment industry, knew other very successful, famous kids and young men, and regularly talked about them.
So when Brian Peck was accused in 2003 by the Nickelodeon star, which we're going to say allegedly was Drake Bell, he actually called Will Friedle and cried to him and basically said that it wasn't his fault. And Will Friedle actually believed him.
One thing to look back and say, hey, we're realizing this was a pattern now, and it's terrible, and I'm glad we realized it. And again, I haven't seen, Ryder saw him 7 years ago, ran into him at a party. I haven't seen this guy in almost 20 years. And that would be fine if we could use that for our growth, great. But there's an actual victim here. And he turned us against the victim to where now we're on his team. And how is that? And that's the thing where, to me, I look back at that as my ever-loving shame for this entire... I mean, getting taken in by somebody who's a good actor and a manipulator, hey, I could chalk that up to being young, and that's the way it is. It's awful, and I'm going to use that as my growth, for my growth as a human being. Great. But when there's an actual victim involved, and now I'm on the abuser's side, that's the thing I can't get over.
Friedle then goes to explain that he had just finished a movie role that Brian Peck actually got for him or assisted him in getting that role, and he felt indebted to him.
And haven't been able to get over.
To be clear, though, he didn't deny that he didn't say that nothing had happened. So by the time we heard about this case and knew anything about it, it was always in the context of, I did this thing, I am guilty, I am going to take whatever punishment the government determines I am, but I'm a victim of jailbait, right? Like I saw that, there was this hot guy and I just did this thing and
he did all of it.
Underage. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we bought that storyline. We bought into that storyline as opposed to saying, whoa, grown man who's 40 something years old. Like, what the hell were you doing to begin?
Why are you even in that position? Yeah. Why are you there? Right. And for me, he called me to his house, which I've been to maybe twice. So that alone was weird. And he sat me down, and because I guess you said this happened in 2001. I didn't hear about this until it was way after 2001, where he sat me down and
he was arrested in 2003.
Okay, I think that's when I found out about it, was 2003 or 2004, maybe even later. And he called me to his house. So he said to me, hey, this is what's happening, but this is what happened. He's crying the whole time.
Here's the real story.
And here's the real story. And I think we had just done a film together, which he got me this role because I wasn't auditioning at the time. It wasn't a great time in my life.
Which is it's very important for you to say that part, because I know because it isn't about the mental illness. It's about the fact that he got you a part. You were not auditioning because of your anxiety. And he got you a part, a straight offer for a movie. Yeah. And you felt indebted to him. Whether or not that's part of it.
I mean, I did.
You felt that as part of the manipulation, and Katie can speak to that. I'm not the expert here. But that's part of his manipulation.
Maybe, but again, the idea of wrapping up my mental illness into any of it, because to me, it seems like I'm pointing to my mental illness like I'm blaming it.
And on top of that, Brian Peck actually asked Ryder Strong and Will Friedle to support him in court. Now, I'm just going to put my little 2 cents in. It's by my personal opinion that Brian Peck knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to leverage his position of power in Hollywood, as well as playing an emotional manipulation game to these actors to help leverage them on his side for the appearance, for the, the apparition that he has supported in Hollywood, regardless of whatever egregious acts that he's been accused of. That's my personal opinion. Now, I will say that this had just happened. This isn't 10 years down the line where we're looking at it here in 2024, where we can really compute all these things, right? This had just happened. So I am just going to say that I'm glad that the cast of Boy Meets World, that they're coming out and being open and honest about that, because it does show that they are really processing this, right? And who knows how hard this is for them. Ryder Strong and 𝐕𝐢𝐬𝐭 were made to write letters in support of Brian Peck back in the day.
Calm, cool, collected. This is what happened, to get emotional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it was, he then asked us to support him and go to court with him, which a lot of us did. And we're sitting in that courtroom on the wrong side of everything, of course, having no idea of this, filled with child actors, to the point where the victim's mother turned and said, look at all the famous people you brought with you, and it doesn't change what you did to my kid. And I just sat there wanting to die.
So Ryder Strong actually attributes the Forrest Gump of Hollywood name to Brian Peck because he knew everyone, and he would consistently name drop everybody.
Part of the manipulation, like,
question I would have, is there anybody he was close with that was his age or older?
Yeah, there was definitely a few.
He had a group,
men.
like
He had a
group of men,
and he was very well connected. Very well connected within Hollywood.
Well, and so much of that very well connectedness is also part of the manipulation. Like, I was thinking about, Ryder, the story you told when you saw him 7 years ago, and thinking about how his manipulation changed, and that all he cared about when he saw you was walking away from that situation, letting you know that these other famous, very well connected people don't care about my crime. You shouldn't either.
Yeah.
And I feel that. I still feel that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so uncomfortable with doing this episode.
I hate it. I hate it.
Overall, I'm really glad that the Boy Meets World cast actually made this podcast episode. Like I said, I'm going to link it in my description below. I think everybody should listen to it, but especially that they are, giving a sense of we hear you, we see you, to victims of child sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation. Okay, so let's go through some of these are some concerns that I have with his, show credits and the shows that he's produced and worked on ever since all of this happened. I was actually plotting on my mind map, and I was just mind blown. By the way, if you guys are looking for a way to support me, NatalieDenise.com. I have an exclusive video content. You will get inside my mind. You'll see how I, plot and point all of these little data points and information pieces. And this is how I organize my information. So this is how I did it for this particular episode. You guys can go to NatalieDenise.com, support me by grabbing an exclusive video content subscription. So anyway, this was actually mind-blowing to me ever since the conviction, because I wanted to put in years, ever since after he was convicted, which was 2004, what shows he actually worked on, what movies, or what he actually had a part in ever since that happened. And so we can only imagine what has happened from 2001 and earlier. As the LAPD alleges on their press release, they did note that for at least 2 years, there are more children that are out there that could be victims of Brian Peck, right? So it is already troubling seeing all of these productions from 2001 and earlier X-Men, Boy Meets World. We kind of went through that. Clueless, Kenan and Kel, Good Burger, The Tick. The list goes on and on and on. But one major concern that I have, and this should it actually enrage you, is after the fact that he was convicted, he was still working on shows and on movies such as Love Wrecked. Love Wrecked, he was a TV reporter in 2005. Now, Love Wrecked actually stars Amanda Bynes. And as you were made aware at the beginning of this video, he actually was an associate producing The Amanda Show before all of this was made to light, that he was convicted and all that. So the fact that he was convicted already and that Amanda Bynes was still tied to him somehow, like she still had to see him on set of something. I mean, that should speak volumes to you about how controlled Hollywood is, how controlled the actors and child actors are, because would all of that truly be her choice, that she would work around a convicted pedophile child sex offender after all of this happened? So he worked with Amanda Bynes on that movie, Love Wrecked. Another movie that was notable that I saw that he was also working on was Outlaw Trail, The Treasure of Butch Cassidy, which actually was a movie, a big synopsis, a bunch of Boy Scouts. So these were teenage boys working within this movie who were in search of treasure, right? If you actually look at more credits, he worked on multiple Disney shows, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Yay Me starring London Tipton. And it's weird because he plays a mirror on these series, right? Wish Gone Amiss in 2007, he plays a mirror. That Sweet Life of Hannah Montana 2007 says that he played a mirror, right? So all of these weird little roles of him playing a mirror of these children. Then he also he played a role in Jack and the Beanstalk in 2009. I mean, there are a plethora of other shows that he worked on, all that from 2000 to 2002. So there are a plethora of child actors that could have also been exploited by Brian Peck. Who knows? But the fact of the matter is that he was still working in Hollywood, and that is a major concern of mine. Very weirdly, in 2009, he played a sex ed teacher in a short horror movie called Quarantine on set in high school. So this just goes to show you that Hollywood clearly knew, but they were okay with making these weird, sick innuendos with a convicted child sex offender. So within my research for this video, just like it's one thing after the other, but the fact that there is actually a Child Protection Act in Hollywood that stands it's actually going ignored. Like Hollywood is completely not looking at this Child Protection Act at all. So there's this foundation called Biz Parents that actually advocated very heavily for this Child Protection Act that was enabled in 2012. The law requires publicists, managers, acting coaches, and headshot photographers who work with child actors to be fingerprinted and pass an FBI background check to screen out registered sex offenders. Only then will they be issued a child performer services permit. Now, the publication deadline, they did an investigation and found that not a single Hollywood publicist who represented child actors obtained a permit. It says here, dozens of managers, acting coaches, and photographers who work with child stars have also failed to comply with the law, which is punishable by a year in a county jail and a $10,000 fine, and yet no one has ever been charged with breaking it. Okay, so now we are pairing Hollywood with the government, okay? And they are failing child actors by allowing them to get sexually abused and not protected by this law. So it says the law AB 1660 prohibits registered sex offenders from representing or providing specified services to artists or to performers under the age of 18. Fingerprints and an FBI background check are required to ensure the registered sex offenders don't skirt the law by working under assumed names. So this is why someone like Brian Peck has been allowed to not just return back to Hollywood, but return back on set around children because nobody is stopping him. The law isn't stopping him, although there is something that stands that absolutely should protect these children from somebody as egregious as Brian Peck. No wonder this is still happening because nobody is holding any of these Hollywood associates accountable. In fact, could we even, I guess, make some sort of speculation that maybe some of these Hollywood associates are paying off Hollywood Hollywood governance, politicians, if you will? How is this going under the radar? With that being said, I hope you guys learned something new about Brian Peck. This is why this is so important to know what's going on in Hollywood and why these child actors have every single right to feel empowered to speak out, because, you know, like we covered here, there are laws that protect children, but nobody is holding them accountable. Nobody is saying, hey, you know, this law was standing and this is punishable by this or that offense. These laws are in place. I was only in this research knowing about this Child Protection Act in California for Hollywood child actors, and yet it still astonishes me that it's not being held in place. What the heck is happening? Guys, let me know if you knew any of this. Let me know about you learning about this Child Protection Act, and if you'll be sharing that information with other people. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you for supporting me. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. I have a lot more content coming up for you guys in regards to this. And believe me, it's stuff like this that keeps driving me to do more and more exposés, because who would have known that child protection laws do exist? We're just not holding officials or those people accountable. With that being said, thanks so much for your support. I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.